Welcome to Our Love podcast, where we share insights from top scientists and relationship experts on all things about love that are out of the box, refreshing, and new. Now sit back, grab a cold drink or hot one if you prefer, and enjoy today's episode.
So, Art Aron, you're just one of my, I don't know how to express it. You're one of the heroes of relationship research from almost any perspective.
Your contributions are not trivial either, believe me.
Well, I'm hoping they're not trivial, but yes, good Lord.
Way beyond that, yes.
So you're professor of psychology at Stony Brook, and what else have you been up to recently? Where else are you in your multi talented ways?
Well, I mean, mostly I'm doing research, and I am physically these days mostly out at Berkeley on the West Coast because that's where my wife is. And for years we were traveling back and forth. We'd live in one semester, we'd live in New York, and she'd fly back and forth. And one semester we'd live out here. But during the pandemic, I've been out here and in Berkeley, where I am now. And basically, I'm doing research on close relationships, but also applying some of our model to intergroup relations. And I collaborate with my wife on her research on highly sensitive people. And, we're starting to do a little research on applying some of our models to climate change.
Fascinating. Wow. Well, I'm going to really look forward to hearing some of that. But I was wondering if it's okay with you if we can start talking about some of your classic work on self-expansion and the inclusion of, as I originally learned it, the inclusion of the other and self principle along with the motivational principle. Maybe we can break that down a little bit.
Yeah, there's self-expansion model, something we developed many, many years ago, inspired actually by Eastern philosophy and by Plato. And the idea is that a fundamental goal is to seek more and more, to expand the self.
Is that the motivational principle?
That's the motivational principle, and that's the core of it. But when we did so, we came to the realization that one major way people do that is through relationships. And one of the main reasons is that when you form a relationship, the other becomes part of yourself. And to some extent, I mean, not entirely. And that expands the self. You also include the relationship, but in forming a relationship expands the self. It's exciting, it's new, it's more, but literally, I mean, actually, somewhat literally, the nature of the self becomes more. We mix up memories. We have a hard time distinguishing a close other from ourself. When we do morphing studies, there's all sorts of ways that we find that, we mix up who we are with who they are. And the closer we are, the more that's the case. And it's usually a very good thing. And when it happens as you develop it, it's very exciting. I'm growing, I'm becoming more,
Yeah. And as you're becoming more, does that mean more interesting, more efficacious, more capable in the world?
Well, in some ways, yes, because my partner's resources and knowledge to some extent become mine, sometimes more than they should. I sometimes find with collaborators that, who are in a somewhat different field, that I think they know what they know. And then suddenly I realize, no, I don't. But but just, for one of the things, one of our earliest studies was we asked people who had, we followed a large group of first-year students, and we asked them each week, have you fallen in love? And among many other questions. They didn't know that was the focus of it. No. And then we had them say, who are you today? And they had to list a bunch of words that came to mind. Actually, with first-year students, we found about a quarter of them fell in love. But what we found is from the week before to the week after they fell in love, there was a dramatic increase in the number of categories they listed as their own. Who are you today?
Wow.
And much more so than, other times for them or for people who didn't fall in love. And that's been replicated, over a couple different studies we did. And Gary Lewandowski, a former student who's now doing great research of his own, he's a professor, even chair of his department. Gary showed that you get the same kind of effect when you look at when people lose a relationship, that who they are becomes less who they say they are.
And so sort of what you're saying is that when we forge a relationship, at least a love relationship so far, maybe you know more about this, but
it also works with friendships and close others and having a child, but love relationships are, very powerful.
I mean, it's hard for me I don't know if you started having this feeling when you were doing this research, but hearing about this research lights me up like a firework. It's so mind-boggling in one sense, but in another sense, we've both done some brain research, and I've done some brain research directly related to your self-expansion model, because I thought, well, shoot, we have this opportunity to test this, and then what we found, we'll get there eventually, but we are such a hyper cooperative species. One question you can ask is, well, how do we do it? How do we merge in terms of cooperative labor? And that's one question. You can help me lift the table up the stairs. But it seems to me that you in your work you've answered one of these really basic fundamental questions about how humans do what they do, which is that they incorporate the other into their representation, however that's accomplished neurally, of the self.
And usually that's a very good thing. Sometimes it can be too much.
Yeah.
One study where we asked people, we have this standard measure of how much does the other part of the self, and we have overlapping circles to different degrees. And that measure has been used thousands of times in studies now. But
my favorite measure.
It works cross-culturally. You don't need the same language stuff. It's a very nice measure. But one of the studies, in fact, we've done a few studies. Deb Mashik was a leader on this, in which we asked people, how much about their relationship. And we also asked them, how much would you like it to be? And what we found is that overall, the closer it is to what they'd like it to be, the better, up to a point. If you're even closer than you want to be, there's a small percentage, 10% or so of couples, married couples who are feeling they've lost themselves to the other. But for most people, it's a very good thing. It's a very good. Of course, again, it depends on who you're merging with. Falling in love with someone, you merge with them. But if you're in another relationship and things are going well, that's not so good. But in general, it's a very good thing. And friendships are almost always good things.
Yeah.
And there's a merger there too,
Now, do you see connections here with Dan Wegner's notion of transactive memory? Do you know about that?
I should, but remind me.
So Dan Wegner was a cognitive psychologist. He was here at UVA for a while, but then he wound up going to Harvard. And he, in the 70s, I think, at some point, wrote this paper. He never really got back to it in any strong sense, that showing that, arguing with some interesting data that our biographies and our knowledge of how to do things in the world is largely non-trivially embedded in our social relationships, not in our heads. So, but we think it's in our heads. So this is exactly what you defined really clearly in the work that you would do, which is that part of the inclusion of the other in the self is that their resources are our resources, including even their memory. We will misattribute our ability to remember something based on our membership in a relationship because the person we know can remember it.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, that can sometimes be a little problematic, but, as I said, that happens with knowledge things too. You think you know something, you don't. You might think you know how to get somewhere and you don't know how to get to. The closer you are, the more you sort of think you know what your partner knows. And, if you're in a close relationship, that works just fine because they can handle some of the things and you can handle some of the things. And, um, one of the things we talk a lot about in our research is that when you form a relationship, there's that enormous self-expansion from including them rapidly and stuff, especially if it's a mad falling in love thing. But then after a while, you get used to it. But if you do new, novel, exciting things with the partner, that sense of growth gets associated with the partner. And the reason that came to mind is that one of the things my wife and I do that's self-expanding together is we collaborate on research, which people think that can be difficult too at times, of course. But it's, as when you collect a bunch of data and you sit down with it, someone put it, you're in the room with the tiger. It's very exciting. And of course, if the results come out, that's really
the reason it's a tiger is that very often the results come out a little bit differently and more interestingly than you thought they were going to.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. And sometimes they just don't work. But
well, I think I mentioned to you, Art, that we're doing this series on curiosity. And, it may be of interest. It may strike you as curious, we'll say, that one of possibly the first person that I thought of when we started digging deep into curiosity was you. And it's precisely for these reasons, what you've done with your work, including your work on long-term romantic relationships, sort of what keeps romance going. You just said it is sort of growing together, right? And for me, in my mind, that's a process of not only curiosity per se, just sort of being a curious person, but I wonder about the role of sort of potentiating that curiosity or capitalizing. Is that resonate with you at all? And if so, I wonder if you could talk about curiosity from that perspective.
We're always looking for opportunities for growth, expansion. Not always. If we're suffering, we're just trying to survive. But we've argued that there's two fundamental, evolutionary motivations: the survival and the expansion. And if you're under survival threat, you may not focus on expansion. And indeed, in the relationship research, there's quite a bit showing that things that operate very differently with couples who live in terrible environments or under great stress. But when we are doing reasonably well, then in any domain, we're looking for more and more and more. And that's what expansion is about. And seeking what will be more, of course, involves curiosity. I want to find it. I haven't thought much about it until you brought this up. But, framing it in that way. But sure, curiosity is really important. One of the studies we did some years ago, also with Gary Lewandowski, I think he was involved in that. Anyway, it was a study in which we looked at, it's thought that people usually prefer a partner who's similar to themselves. And in general, there's been lots of research showing similarity doesn't matter that much for the relationship, but thinking you're similar matters. With a few exceptions. Most people are heterosexual. They're not looking similar in that regard, but mostly we think we want similars. Now, it turns out that if you think the relationship will work fairly well, you'd actually prefer someone who's a little different because they're more interesting. Now, again, not on every domain. If you are a calm person and they're an angry person, you might not want that difference. But in the study we did, we looked at things that you're engaged in or you're interested in. So someone who's really interested in science, who's really involved in science, might be, if they think the relationship would work, would actually prefer someone who's interested in music. It's like the difference. I'm going to grow from that. I'm going to learn some new things I didn't know.
So I wonder, from a certain perspective, or maybe just directly, it sounds like curiosity then is one of the mechanisms for meeting this core motivational drive, let's say, that humans have, or that all critters may have. I call animals critters.
Yeah, I think all critters probably have that. And it sounds, yes, I think that's why else would we be curious except to gain something from it? Again,
Right.
We could be curious just to find where we can survive, but I think curiosity is mostly about growth. Usually survival is about things we already know about.
Well, and isn't growth ultimately about survival as well? It sort of provides that extra resource pack that we carry with us.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. Too. Yeah.
So could we get back to a little bit to the long-term romance?
Sure.
Long-term romance, because we have this idea that when you meet, we've established that when you meet someone, you start establishing a relationship, you start attributing more adjectives or descriptors to your own self, partly because you've incorporated the adjectives that you would have attributed to them to your own self. And you both expand and you grow, and it's all very joyful. But then years go by, and maybe curiosity isn't so easy to sustain after lots of years. What happens among these couples that stay romantically engaged with each other for the long term?
And some do.
Yeah, well, that's the first question, right? It's like, does that even happen?
We did a nationally representative U.S. survey, and we found that among people married 10 years or longer, 40% said they were intensely in love with their partner.
40?
Now, you have to understand, this is 10 years. That means only about half who got married are still together. So maybe it's 20% of those, but still. And another question was, do they really mean it? Now, in general, we find that self-report questions about love and stuff are actually fairly accurate. They're not that influenced. But just to check, we did an fMRI study of people who'd been married at least 10 years, most of them 20 years, who claimed to be very intensely in love with their partner, madly, crazily in love.
Yeah.
And we put them in the scanner, and we'd done a lot of studies, as you know, of people who've recently fallen in love. So we kind of knew, as others have too, so we kind of knew what to look for. And these couples showed that same dopamine reward area when they were shown pictures of their partner versus familiar strangers. It's really, it seems very real and and meaningful to people. Now, the question is, what gets them there?
Right. That's the question. That's what everybody watching this is going to want to know.
Yeah, well, we don't know for sure. In fact, we're doing some research now. There's so much research, longitudinal research on, how relationships develop and what from early on predicts, people being happy together. But there really isn't any from early showing what predicts people to be especially happy together. Now, the data are there. And so Terry Orbach, who's got a great data set, and I and Rosie Shrout, one of her former postdocs, are doing some studies now where we're analyzing some large data sets to try to sort that out. Now, we have some ideas of what they might be. In the nationally representative survey we did, those who were intensely in love were more likely to report that they do interesting activities with their partner, but it wasn't the only predictor, but it was an important one. We just want to see if we can figure out what's going on here. I mean, we do know from one data set, is actually one that Terry had collected some years ago, that when people were asked at I think it was year 7, are you bored? How exciting are what you do with your partner? And then we measured, the same people were measured at year 16. Those who were, not bored and excited were much more likely to be happy at year 16. than the others. So it's a major predictor of happiness. There are other things too. I mean, certain things have to be in place. You have to, a huge factor in general in marital satisfaction is just yourself. People don't want to know that. But if you're anxious or depressed or insecure, it's hard to have a relationship, it's possible, but it's much harder. And we tend to, at first we're excited in a relationship and then we feel bad and we blame the partner. If you're anxious or depressed or insecure, a major thing you can do is to do something about it. If it's minor, learn to meditate, do something. If it's more major, get therapy. Or if it's very major, get medication. But that really matters. And then there's other things like being able to handle conflicts. There's a lot of research on that. Not having problems with family. What's the iconic example of romantic love in the West?
The iconic example of romantic love in the West.
In literature and Western.
Boy, I don't know.
About Romeo and Juliet.
Of course. Yeah, Romeo and Juliet.
How'd that work out?
That didn't work out too well.
No, and it was the problem.
Capulets and Montagues.
Yeah, the problem was family.
Yeah, isn't it the case?
Yeah, it's not quite so big an issue with, in American culture as in many Eastern cultures or many more traditional cultures. But still, there's many groups for who it's a big issue. It's very important for couples once they have, especially once they have children, to pay attention to their in-laws and try to have good relationships with them. And another big factor is, as I mentioned earlier, just stress that you're under. It's hard to deal with that. And then, those are some of the biggies that really, affect relationships. But then there are things that people can do to make them a lot better beyond that. And one of them is to do self-expanding activities regularly. There's been a lot of studies now where we've done early studies where we randomly assigned couples to once a week do something from a list we gave them that was novel and challenging versus merely pleasant but enjoyable. And the ones who did the novel and exciting, every week for about an hour or two for 10 weeks had a huge increase in their relationship quality.
Okay.
Compared to just the people doing the pleasant things. Not just same old, even if they're nice, make it different.
You said something really important about how people who have sort of a harder time in relationships often are people who are depressed, anxious, maybe we could say generally broadly neurotic, or you're under a lot of stress. And one of the things that we know about those conditions and the effect that stress has on your mind is that it creates a self-focus. It orients you towards, the state of yourself and the whether you're safe or whether you're successful or whatever it is. And that seems to, I wonder if that keeps you from progressing into a self-expansive kind of mode.
Good question. I don't know. I think also, I don't really know how curious or how much people who are depressed or anxious are seeking self-expansion. I could also imagine that they want it even more because they're suffering. Is there some way I can really do something exciting? Maybe they're more likely to find an alternative or do something else besides their partner. It's easy to blame the partner.
Yeah.
So I don't. But
it's really fascinating that you can do these exercises. To go into you give them a list of things to try.
Well, what we did in that initial study is we gave each couple member who volunteered separately a list of 50 items things that couples do together, and we asked them for each to say how exciting it would be to do with your partner or how pleasant, and then we randomly assigned them, and one group got a list that each of the partners had rated as highly exciting but only moderately pleasant. And the other group got a list, and they weren't the same. The other group got a list that was highly pleasant but only moderately exciting. There were different items. Sometimes what's exciting for one couple was, just merely pleasant for another, or even boring. There's differences in what would be exciting for people. But exciting what we found is it has to do with being new and original, not just with being, it's not, doesn't have to do with heart fluttering or, skydiving, if it's not too much for you, can be exciting, but also taking a cooking class together,
Right.
something like that,
Yeah.
And we've done research on that. And it's not, it doesn't hurt if it's got that physiological stirring. And of course, doing something novel and challenging with the partner, one of the reasons it makes you feel better, there's some new research that's come out, lovely research, that shows that one of the mediators, one of the things that helps make it happen is it increases the quality of your sex life and makes you have more sexual desire. So when you do new, exciting things, it affects for a variety of dimensions. But one of the things it does is it makes your sex life better, which is an important part of relationships.
It's amazing. There's this, I've seen for years now, this kind of backdoor debate between a therapist named Esther Perel, who's always saying, what we need is novelty. We need to, recognize that a fact of our relationships is that sexually we become not that interesting to each other after a while, and blah, blah, blah. And then on the other hand, there's Sue Johnson, who's saying, no. The key core mission for even a better sex life is closeness. Emotional closeness and support bonding and these kinds of things. That's her whole thing. It sounds to me like what you're suggesting here is both. What you're doing is you're saying, let's grow our emotional bond by becoming curious about each other as we discover new things and grow ourselves together.
Yeah. And of course, also our relationship is growing. And also if we grow in other ways, but associate that with the partner, that also makes the relationship better. So in other words, if we do something together, and it doesn't necessarily make me include them more or anything like that, but here we've learned something new, and my partner was with me, and we've done one of the classic experiments we did, lab experiments, is we had couples crawl across a mat, and they came in, they were randomly assigned, and they were told they were going to fill out some questionnaires, do an activity, we'd videotape them in. What they didn't know is half of the couples were randomly assigned to do an exciting activity. Their wrists and ankles were tied together with Velcro straps, and they had to push a foam roller across a long gym mat over a barrier and come back within 3 minutes. And they had 3 or 4 tries to do that, and they couldn't use their teeth or their hands. And we'd done a lot of piloting. Couples really enjoyed this. It was exciting and interesting. Most of them.
I want to do it right now.
Yeah. No, it was fun. I've got a picture of it I could show you, but we'd have to share screen and stuff like that. But, in any case, and then the control condition is each of them separately went back and forth across the mat. And it was pleasant. They didn't mind seeing the other. But doing the exciting one together had a big effect, not just in their self-report, but we had them have a conversation. One of the studies, we had them have a conversation afterwards about, something like if you were given so much money to remodel your home, what would you do? And what we found is we had people code the conversations who didn't know who was in which experimental condition. And the conversations among the people who had done the exciting activity were much more positive and, so forth than the ones in the, merely pleasant condition. So, it's watching your partner do an activity while you're doing something that's, I can't remember the details now. It was a study that we did about 30 years ago. But
yeah,
the point is that self-expanding alone needs to be associated with the partner. Now, individual self-expansion, if I'm self-expanding through my work or through my activities, up to a point, that can be a good thing for the relationship as long as it doesn't separate me from the relationship. If I'm feeling good and positive, and then I'm with my partner. And of course, supporting your partner's self-expansion or feeling supported, especially feeling supported by your partner when you're self-expanding, is huge. We've done a number of studies of that, where you're doing something your partner, you're trying to do something self-expanding and you feel your partner is supporting you while doing it. And that's very positive for the relationship.
Well, it seems to me. Oh, go ahead.
One of the things that Jen Tomlinson has done with collaborators is to look at the effect of supporting your partner when they've retired, supporting them to do new, interesting, exciting activities, and even on their own from retirement. And that has a huge effect on the quality of the retirement and the quality of the relationship.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, one of the things, you mentioned this measure that you have earlier, the inclusion of the other in self scale. And
yes.
I just want to describe that for everybody. This is a series of overlapping circles that goes from two circles that don't overlap at all to two circles that are very substantially overlapped and all the spaces in between. And the more overlapped you are, the more you're reporting that you and your partner are sort of overlapped. You're the same person, more or less.
Yeah.
And I love this scale. And I just want to say with you on screen how much I love this scale. In my graduate work with Lee Seacrest at the University of Arizona, I had a minor in measurement. And this is my favorite scale because of the semantic differential between the items on the scale, the overall meaning of the scale. It is absolutely crystal clear to people what you mean with this scale. And that's such a triumph.
Well, we were lucky to develop it. I don't remember how we did it, but we had fun coming up with it.
Well, everybody understands it. And the question that I have, the reason I wanted to go through that little review is these exercises that you talk about, self-expanding, and being curious with your partner, doing exciting things together, not alone necessarily. Do they move people on this scale?
Oh yeah. I mean, of course, the thing is that the scale is so highly associated with how satisfied you are overall in a relationship,
right?
And how in love you are. They're not quite the same.
Yeah.
So it's not surprising that anything that would increase satisfaction or love would also increase closeness, and anything that would increase closeness would increase satisfaction and love. They tend to be highly linked.
That's true.
So it's a little hard to sort them out. I mean, there are some studies that find some differences. For example, you've probably heard of, you probably know my Fast Friends procedure. We're in about 40 minutes.
This is the other thing I wanted to talk to you. And this is the other thing that made me think of you instantly when I thought about curiosity.
Yeah, well, there's what's called what in the media has come to be called the 36 questions.
Yes.
And it's a way to develop closeness strongly in a short period of time that we develop for use in the lab. Because if you want to look at the effect of closeness and you just take people who are close versus not, they have different histories, they've chosen each other. So we wanted to be able to, in a short amount of time, randomly assign pairs of people to be close or not. And so we developed this procedure, and in about, using the overlapping circle measure, in about 45 minutes, doing the procedure, people reported being as close to the person they did it with as, almost as close as the closest person in their life.
It's ingenious, this study.
Very powerful. It doesn't necessarily last that long, but the New York Times article that made this so famous to the general public, and it's been used widely in research as a tool, which is what we intended it for. It talked about using it to fall in love. Now, it wasn't designed to fall in love. It was designed to create closeness. But of course, closeness can help with that. Rich Flatcher, who was interested in the issue of couples having couple friendships. And that's known from lots of research to be a good thing for couples. The question is, what's the direction of causality? Is it that couples who are happy are more likely to have couple friends, or couple whose friends are more likely to make you happy? So he used our procedure where he had two couples do this as a foursome. Each of the four answered each question. And what he found is that it really got them a lot closer to each other. Now, I collaborated with him later on some research in which we compared couple doing it alone, just the two of them, versus two couples doing it. And what we found is that either way, there's a good substantial increase in closeness to your partner. although it's a little stronger, surprisingly, when these are established relationships, when it's two couples. But passionate love actually increased more for the couple, much more than closeness towards your partner when you're doing this as two couples. It's something I strongly recommend is, my wife and I, we hadn't done this in years. So, certainly we'd never done it with another couple. So when the pandemic started, we said, what can we do with Zoom? It'd be interesting. And so we had a couple we didn't know really well, and we did this with them by Zoom as a foursome. And it really was great. We had a great effect on us.
Are these questions freely available someplace?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you look up the 36 questions.
36 questions, they'll be out there.
Yeah, they're on the web, and people are made, sets of cards about them and stuff like that. Basically, the idea is they move you from being gradually from questions that are sort of, mundane, not mundane exactly, but not very deep, to questions that are deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yeah.
And they also throw in a couple other items along the way. Again, some items after a while, there's a question, name some things you've noticed about your partner that you have in common. As I mentioned earlier, thinking you have things in common matters actually doesn't. We don't have any questions, name some things you don't have in common, And then the other thing that they threw in is, name some things that you've noticed that you like about your partner or the other person, This turns out enormously important in falling in love and in forming relationships, is to think the other person likes you. And I think that's because it's a sign that the chance of expanding is much greater if they like you, and to include them.
So if I could just sort of summarize this a little bit.
Yes.
You've got this basic motivational principle that has you seeking to expand what you're capable of and what you know. And there's obvious survival implications for that.
And your resources.
Best way to do that. What's that?
And your resources.
And your resources. The best way to do that is socially, because other people are also doing that, and they come with their whole collection of things, right? So in order to learn about them and their resources, which let's just suppose is almost synonymous with them becoming exciting as potential self-expansion partners.
Yeah, I think it's also feeling they're learning about you.
Feeling they're learning about you. Yes, of course.
It's not just including the partner in the self, it's thinking the partner is including you in the self matter hugely too.
Oh, yeah.
The research on that. And one of the things is you used to think it was entirely self-disclosure when we started this, it was mainly pushing it. But since then, Harry Reese and others have shown a huge, important thing in connecting with people and getting close is feeling the others being responsive to you, that they understand you.
Right.
They validate that they care about you. And so this self-disclosure of stuff gives them an opportunity to say something, sort of spontaneously. It's likely to happen that they're going to show responsiveness that you feel.
It reminds me too that one of the key indicators, or one of the key risk factors for loneliness, or even in men, suicide, is feeling useless, feeling not needed, feeling not required for someone else's well-being is a big risk factor.
I didn't know that, but that makes good sense.
It makes good sense, right? It all sort of starts to fold in together. But then taking from, establishing closeness, you've also provided us with this great work looking at how we maintain that closeness, at least potentially how. Maybe some couples just do it and we don't have the causal arrow going in the right direction. But I think that you have voted with your feet a little bit here, Art, by doing this exercise with that other couple, for example, and doing some of this stuff with your own wife.
We do basically everything. Anytime we hear about something in the media, or not the media, when we hear about something from a research article, and we follow all the research on relationships that improves relationships, we act on it immediately. That's, we both follow. She collaborates with me on my research and I collaborate with her on hers. So, another great thing people do to, make their relationship better is called capitalization.
Yes.
Is to celebrate your partner's successes. And I remember the first time I read that, Elaine was out, and we had submitted a little earlier a paper, a review paper of her research on highly sensitive person, which I was a co-author on, but she was really the main author. And we submitted it to a very high-level journal. I thought our chances of acceptance were very slim. And I was home when the email came in. She was out saying the editors loved it, the reviewers loved it. They only wanted some minor modifications. They were going to publish it. So I made a poster of that email and put it on the front door.
Oh, wow.
And we had a great night.
That is fabulous.
But so, again, whatever we read about that's useful, we try to take advantage of for our own relationship. And I think, that's an advantage of being a relationship researcher.
Well, and in some ways, it reminds me of being a researcher in general. I mean, when I was doing my hand-holding experiments, and I've done so many of them now because I'm so afraid to do anything else. But one of the first things I thought of was, well, what if we're putting the other person in danger? What if we put the handholder in danger?
Mm-hmm.
And what we found was that if the person supporting you was something you knew well and had a relationship with, then your brain responded as if it was you.
Yeah.
I mean, all over the place, not just like in the amygdala, it was like the whole thing, like a machine learning device would have a hard time knowing who the threat was directed at. But if it was a stranger, that wasn't the case at all.
Wow. Yeah. I didn't
Absolutely mind-blowing.
I didn't know that study.
Yeah.
Please send it to me.
I will send it to you. It is, we've replicated it now twice. It's really looking like this is not what you pioneered is not, this is not a metaphor. This is not, a way for us to understand, how people work. It is literally true, I think, that however the brain creates a subjective experience of a self, which is an activity, after all, of neurons moving through time.
Yeah.
The way that we establish a relationship, what that subjective experience is of relationship, is the grafting of them onto our that representation that we create of what a self is.
Yeah, we did a study years and years ago where individuals in the scanner were hearing names of a neutral person or of a close friend, and then we looked at the correlation of or of themselves. They were using their own name too. The correlation of the pattern of brain activations for the self versus the close friend for the overall brain.
Oh, yes. I know this paper. Yeah.
So, it's that same idea. I mean, what you've done is even much more powerful, but it's a very direct sort of thing.
Yeah. This is a physical property of our biology that we incorporate the other into the self. And that's how we know that they're special. And how we also know that they know that we're special to them. And that's part of that reciprocation.
Helpful if it's both ways, yes. To some extent, if we're attracted to someone and don't even have a relationship with them yet, we still include them to some extent in the self.
Oh, yeah. I had a conversation. One of the little known factoids of my life is that for about 10 years in my younger days, I was the webmaster for Randy Newman, the recording artist Randy Newman.
Oh, yeah.
And I got to know him fairly well. And one time we were talking about fans. And he said that one of the most disconcerting thing about being a famous person is that you meet people who have poured over your body of work in such detail that you are like a family member to them. You are a close person to them, and yet you've never seen them before in your entire life.
Yeah. I mean, to some extent, Socrates is part of myself.
Absolutely. We talk about this I teach a course that here on the neuroscience of social relationships, and we spend a fair amount of time on your self-expansion work. And we invariably discuss how people self-expand with characters in literature, with superheroes in movies, and this is part of their appeal. They appeal to us because they touch important aspects of our lives that we resonate with.
Yeah.
Art, I don't know if I have a lot more. I mean, I could do this all day, but we're going to wrap it up here.
Okay.
Thank you so much for talking with me yet again.
Well, thank you. It's such a pleasure. You're so good at doing these interviews. I feel so, enriched by the process even. Thank you.
Oh, terrific. Well, it certainly is true for me. And I will send you those papers.
Please do.
And we'll talk again soon.
Okay. Thank you, Jim, so much.
Thanks for listening to Our Love podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's topic. Please be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and give us a 5-star rating to help others find us. We'll see you again next week, and we hope that you are experiencing your best love today.